Winds howled, snow swirled everywhere, and visibility dropped to almost zero. 17 climbers were trapped on top of Mount Everest, running out of oxygen. Did they have a chance to survive? And why would that day go down in history as the 1996 Mount Everest disaster? At the end of March that year, a team of 18 people led to the top by Rob Hall came together in Kathmandu, Nepal. The very next day, they began their 9-day-long hike along the Himalayan paths. By April 9th, they finally reached base camp, which is the starting point for climbing Mount Everest. The journey wasn't easy, and many team members got sick on the way from the altitude. At the same time, another climber, Scott Fischer, was leading his team of 19 people to base camp. When both teams arrived there, they started exercising and learned how to breathe where there wouldn't be much oxygen. On Rob's team, one climber got frostbite on some of his toes, and his throat froze, making it hard for him to talk. On Scott's team, one man had trouble breathing even while at base camp, so he had to use bottled oxygen there. Another severe problem happened with one of Scott's Sherpas. Those guys work as guides and porters for climbers in the Himalayas. They can carry loads up to 2 times as heavy as their own weight up and down the mountain. An average, physically fit adult man can carry a backpack loaded with a quarter of their body weight without a problem. So those Sherpas are really like real-life X-Men. They've also developed the superpower to survive low-pressure, low-oxygen conditions at high altitudes. Scientists suggest it's because they have lower oxygen concentrations in their blood and more oxygen flows to their muscles. It could also be their genes. In either case, one of Scott's superhuman Sherpas got sick and could barely breathe because of the thin air. He was forced to return to the hospital, but passed away several weeks later. Sadly, it wouldn't be the only demise on that tragic ascent. The teams pressed on and departed base camp on May 6th and reached Camp 2 on the same day. 3 days later, they made their way to Camp 4, the final camp before the summit. The plan was to climb to the summit and return to Camp 4 within 18 hours. Staying too long at such high altitudes, especially without extra oxygen, could be very dangerous. Meanwhile, one climber from another expedition that was also on its way to the top stepped out of his tent without properly attaching the sharp spikes on his boots. Without them, he slipped and fell into a deep crack in the ice on a steep part of the mountain. But after he was rescued, he still decided to climb down the mountain the next day and didn't survive. At that point, the teams were in the zone where there isn't enough oxygen in the air, so it's hard for the human body to survive. Some climbers from the groups met another team who were heading back down the mountain. They told them it was too dangerous to push on because of bad weather, but no one listened to the warning. At midnight on May 10th, climbers from different groups started their journey to the top. Each of them carried 2 extra oxygen tanks, but they knew the oxygen would run out by 5 p.m., so they had to climb up and get back down quickly. The Sherpas who helped set up safety ropes were delayed, so the climbers had to wait for an hour on the steep slopes. Some climbers were less experienced, which slowed the entire group down. The leader of the first group, Rob Hall, had told everyone to turn back by 1 or 2 p.m., whether they made it to the summit or not. Around 1 p.m., the first group of climbers reached the top of Mount Everest. Many climbers didn't turn around at the planned 2 p.m. deadline. Scott Fischer let his team keep going until after 3 p.m. Rob Hall and one of his climbers, Doug Hansen, didn't make it to the top until 4 p.m., far too late to start heading back safely. By then, the weather was getting worse. By 3:30 p.m., a storm began rolling in, and by 6 p.m., it had become a full blizzard. Some climbers got back to camp safely, but by 10 p.m., half of the group was still stuck in the storm. One group was stranded at 27,000 feet, just 200 feet from Camp 4. The blizzard made it impossible to see, so they decided to huddle together and wait for the storm to pass. Rob Hall and Doug Hansen were stuck near a steep, icy section called Hillary Step. Hansen collapsed, and Hall stayed with him. Hansen's body was never found. Later, Sherpas found the bodies of other climbers at different altitudes on the mountain. The disaster took 8 lives in total and injured others. It was the highest number of fatalities within 24 hours on Mount Everest. 5 years after that, the mighty Everest did everything to stop Marco Siffredi from being the first person to snowboard all the way down its summit. The route he chose for the descent didn't have enough snow, so the French mountaineer and snowboarder had to choose another one. After just 660 feet of the journey, a fastening strap on his snowboard broke because of the cold. A Sherpa helped him to repair it, and he finished the descent to 21,000 feet in 2 hours. The next year, Marco came back to repeat his success on a different slope of Everest. It was August, so it was kinda late in the season, but it didn't stop him. Marco reached the summit with 3 Sherpas on the 8th of September. He was really tired by then, and the weather was changing, so his guides told him not to go. But he didn't listen. The Sherpas lost sight of him several times. About 4,300 feet below Camp 3, the Sherpas saw a distant figure of a man who stood up and then disappeared down the mountain. No one ever found either Siffredi or snowboard tracks leading to his last refuge. But we might still hear about Marco, as it sometimes takes about 100 years to find traces of someone who was lost on Everest. On June 8, 1924, Andrew Sandy Irvine and George Mallory set out to do something no one had ever done before: reach the top of Mount Everest. But something went wrong, and the 2 men vanished in the icy heights. No one knew if they had made it to the summit before disappearing. If they had succeeded, they would have beaten the first ascent record that was set only 29 years later. In 1999, climbers found Mallory's body on the mountain. But then, for some reason, the body mysteriously disappeared. Climbers couldn't locate it with drones or cameras, even though they had the exact coordinates of the spot. It looks like someone moved it, but no one knows why. Then one day in September 2024, a team working on a National Geographic documentary spotted something unusual: a boot sticking out of the ice on a glacier far below the steep north face of Everest. The leather looked old and cracked, and the steel hobnails on the sole were from a time long ago. Inside the boot, they found a sock with a red label stitched inside. It said A.C. Irvine, confirming that these were Sandy Irvine's remains. A few days earlier, while hiking down the central Rongbuk Glacier, the team had discovered an old oxygen bottle from 1933. That bottle wasn't connected to Mallory and Irvine's climb, but it helped the team figure out where objects and bodies might fall if someone slipped down the mountain. Irvine had carried a small Kodak camera during the climb, and many believe the photos inside it might hold the answer to the biggest question: had they reached the summit before they passed away? Members of Irvine's family have offered DNA samples to confirm his identity. That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.